All right, so today we're going to really dig into AB 1482, California's Tenant Protection Act of 2019.
Okay.
And I know a lot of you out there probably have at least heard of it,
Right.
maybe even had to deal with it.
Yeah.
But we want to kind of like peel back the layers and see how it really works,
Sure.
especially when it comes to all these exemptions,
Right.
because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, it can be complicated.
So maybe before we get into all that,
Okay.
could you kind of give us like a big picture overview
Absolutely.
of what AB 1482 is really trying to do?
So AB 1482, you can think of it as trying to balance things out between landlords and tenants.
Okay.
Because, before this law,
Right.
California had this kind of like patchwork system for rent control, which meant a lot of renters were kind of vulnerable.
Yeah.
So AB 1482 is like the statewide safety net.
Okay.
But it's not perfect.
Right. Yeah.
There's some complicated stuff in there.
Yeah. So maybe before we even get into the exemptions, can we just recap, like, what does AB 1482 actually do for renters?
Okay, so basically it tries to deal with these two big problems.
Okay.
Like super high rent increases.
Right.
And then like random evictions.
Uh-huh.
So the first thing it does is set limits on how much a landlord can raise the rent each year.
Okay.
And the second thing is it says landlords have to have a good reason, a just cause, to evict someone who's lived there for at least a year.
Right.
So no more just kicking people out for no reason.
Right. So it's like creating some stability for renters.
Exactly.
Okay. But then we get into all these exemptions,
Right.
which kind of feel like they poke holes in that stability.
Yeah, there are some exceptions.
So let's start with rent caps.
Okay.
So I know AB 1482 usually limits rent increases to 5% plus like the local inflation rate.
Right, the consumer price index.
Or 10%, whichever is lower.
Yeah.
But are there exceptions to that?
Oh, there are.
Like what?
Well, a big one is for new construction.
Okay.
So any rental unit built within the last 15 years.
Is exempt from that rent cap.
So like if a building was finished in 2010,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be subject to AB 1482 until 2025.
Exactly. It's a rolling exemption.
Okay, so does that mean if I'm living in like a brand new apartment, I could get hit with a huge rent increase in a few years when that exemption expires?
Yeah. Potentially.
That seems kind of like the opposite of protecting tenants.
Yeah. I mean, it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
The idea is that if we encourage new construction,
Right.
eventually there'll be more housing options and hopefully rents will go down in general.
Okay.
But yeah, in the short term, some people in newer buildings might see bigger increases.
All right. I guess that makes sense.
Okay.
What about single-family homes and condos?
Okay. So
Are those exempt too?
it depends.
What?
They're only exempt if they're not owned by like a big company.
Okay.
So not a corporation
Okay.
or a REIT
Right.
or an LLC with a corporate member.
Okay. So if it's just like a regular person who owns their home and rents it out, right, then it's probably exempt.
Okay.
But if it's owned by a corporation, then it
Mhm.
falls under AB 1482.
Okay. So it's not just about the building itself.
Right.
It's about who owns it.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
And landlords have to actually give written notice about this exemption.
Oh, really?
They can't just tell the tenant.
Okay.
They have to write it down.
That seems like it could lead to some problems if they're not careful.
It could.
What about other types of properties?
Okay. Well,
Might be exempt.
affordable housing units are usually exempt.
Oh, okay.
Those are the ones that have rules about being affordable for lower income folks.
Right. Yeah.
And those rules stay in place.
Okay, so AB 1482 doesn't override that.
Yep.
But that does make it even harder to figure out which rules apply to you.
Yeah, it can be confusing.
All right, well, let's move on to the other big part of AB 1482,
Okay.
just cause eviction.
Right.
We talked about it a little bit before. But can you remind us what just cause actually means?
Basically, it means a landlord can't just evict a tenant
Right.
who's lived there for a year or more for any random reason. They have to have a real legal reason.
Like what?
Like if the tenant doesn't pay rent
Okay.
or breaks the lease
Right.
or is doing something illegal there.
So it's about preventing landlords from kicking people out unfairly.
Yeah. Or like as retaliation.
Okay, but I'm guessing there are exemptions to this rule too.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, tell me about those.
This is where things get interesting.
Okay.
Because sometimes there are special housing situations. So one exemption is if there are local rules about just cause eviction
Right.
that are even stronger than AB 1482,
Okay.
then those local rules would be the ones that are followed.
So AB 1482 is like the bare minimum.
You could say that.
And local governments can go further.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all.
Okay, what else?
All right, this one might surprise you.
Okay.
Single-family homes are exempt from just cause eviction.
Wait, really?
If the owner lives there
Okay.
and they rent out no more than 2 bedrooms or units.
So that includes like ADUs and stuff?
Yeah, accessory dwelling units too.
Okay, so if I live in my house and rent out a spare room, I don't have to follow those just cause eviction rules.
That's right.
That seems like a pretty big exception.
It is, but the idea is that it's different when the owner's actually living there.
Right, you're sharing the space.
Exactly. It's not like a traditional landlord-tenant situation.
Okay, so they're trying to balance things out between the rights of tenants and homeowners.
Right, especially when the homeowner's living there too.
Okay, so we've talked about exemptions for new construction, single-family homes, and stricter local ordinances.
Right.
Are there any other exemptions to just cause eviction?
Yes, one more. It's about shared living arrangements.
Okay.
So if the tenant shares a bathroom or kitchen with the owner, and the owner lives there, then that unit is also exempt.
So like if I rent out a room in my house and we share a kitchen, then AB 1482's just cause eviction rules don't apply.
Exactly.
Okay, so again, it's recognizing that it's a different situation when you're living more closely with the landlord.
Right.
It's not as much of like a formal landlord-tenant thing.
Right.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense.
Right.
But I have to say, it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated.
It seems like all these exemptions, while they might be for good reasons, they also make things really confusing.
Yeah, it's not a simple law.
For both landlords and tenants.
For everyone.
Right, it's important to remember that AB 1482, while it's meant to protect people, it's not like a magic solution.
This isn't a quick fix.
It's complicated.
Definitely.
And it's important to understand how it all works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been really helpful. We've covered a lot on rent caps and just cause evictions, but there's more to talk about.
Definitely.
So stay with us as we keep going deeper into AB 1482.
All right.
So we're back, and I'm still trying to get my head around all this.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Are there any exemptions that, like, cause more confusion than others?
Oh, for sure.
Like ones that landlords might try to use as loopholes or something?
Yeah, one that comes up all the time is substantial remodels.
Okay.
Landlords can use that as a reason to evict someone.
Right.
But it has to be more than just like repainting.
Right. What exactly makes a remodel substantial under this law?
It's got to be major.
Okay.
Like stuff that needs permits from the city, like changing the structure of the building or like big electrical upgrades or redoing all the plumbing.
So not just like cosmetic stuff.
Right. It has to be stuff that you can't do safely with the tenant living there.
Okay. So the tenant actually has to move out because of the work.
Right.
But couldn't a landlord just lie about how big the remodel is?
That's why documentation is so important. If your landlord says you have to leave for a remodel, ask to see the permits.
Okay.
Make sure you understand what they're actually doing.
Right.
And if anything seems off, talk to a tenant rights group or a lawyer.
Good advice. Better safe than sorry.
Definitely.
So you mentioned before that mobile homes are usually covered by AB 1482.
Right. They usually are.
But I'm guessing there are exceptions there too.
There are some.
Okay.
Like if the mobile home is technically a single-family home and it's not owned by a corporation or a REIT, then it might be exempt from the rent caps.
But that's probably pretty rare, right?
It is, yeah.
So for most people living in mobile home parks, AB 1482 applies.
Exactly.
Which is good because they really need those protections.
Absolutely.
It feels like we've been so focused on the exemptions.
Yeah, we have.
That I kind of lost sight of why this law is important in the first place.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds.
Totally.
But AB 1482 is about something bigger. It's about California saying that housing is a basic human right.
Okay.
And that renters deserve to be protected.
Right. Not just from bad landlords, but from, like, the system itself.
Exactly.
From being taken advantage of. From being pushed out of their homes.
Right. It's about trying to make things more fair.
So it's not perfect.
Nope.
But it's a step in the right direction.
I think so.
Okay. So even with all these exemptions, we can't forget about that bigger goal of creating a more just system.
Exactly.
But let's be real. There are always going to be landlords who try to find ways around the rules.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So what can landlords do to make sure they're following the law?
Well, the biggest thing is documentation.
Okay.
And clear communication.
So no more like, just trust me, you're exempt kind of stuff.
Exactly. Everything has to be written down.
Got it.
If you're claiming an exemption, you need proof.
Like what kind of proof?
Keep those certificates of occupancy.
Okay.
Your property deeds, rental agreements, all that stuff.
Keep it organized.
Yeah, and make sure you're giving your tenants written notice about any exemptions that apply.
Right. Don't just assume they know the law.
Exactly. Be transparent.
Okay. Good advice for landlords. Now, what about tenants?
Okay, well,
what should they be doing?
Even if you think your unit is exempt, learn the basics of the law.
Okay.
Because that exemption might not last forever.
Right.
Like that 15-year thing for new construction.
Exactly.
So even if you're in a new building, you should still know your rights.
Definitely. Keep copies of everything.
Like what?
Your lease agreement.
Okay.
Any notices from your landlord. Anything about rent increases or eviction.
So you have proof if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
All right.
And just like for landlords, communication is key.
Okay.
If you don't understand something, or if you think your landlord is doing something wrong, don't be afraid to speak up.
Right. Don't just assume they're right. Exactly. Knowing your rights is important.
It's like having a shield.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else should tenants know?
There are people who can help you.
Okay.
Tenant rights groups. Legal aid services.
Okay.
They can give you advice if you're having problems.
This is all really helpful.
Good.
I'm starting to see the big picture now.
That's great.
Of how this law works for both sides.
It's complicated.
It is.
But understanding it is important.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about a lot.
We have.
But there's still more to cover, right?
Yeah, there's more.
Okay, so we've been talking about all the details of AB 1482.
Right.
But I'm curious about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Like, how is this law actually affecting the rental market in California?
Right. Has it actually done what it was supposed to do?
Yeah, like, have we seen any real changes?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
It's kind of early to say for sure.
Okay.
But we are starting to see some interesting things.
Like what?
Well, one of the things people were worried about was that AB 1482 would make people less likely to build new housing.
Especially rentals. Right?
Exactly.
Because if you can't raise the rent much,
right,
and it's harder to evict people, it might not seem like a good investment.
Yeah, that was the thinking.
So has that actually happened?
It's tough to say for sure.
Okay.
Some studies have shown a bit of a drop in new rental construction since the law went into effect. But it's hard to know if that's just because of AB 1482.
Right, because there's always so much going on in the housing market.
Exactly.
Interest rates, construction costs, all that stuff.
It's all connected.
But even a small decrease in new construction could be a problem, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially with the housing crisis in California.
Every new unit makes a difference.
Right.
So we need to keep watching this.
Okay.
And see what happens long term.
What about the impact on tenants, though?
Okay. So
was AB 1482 made things more affordable?
Well, there's some evidence that it has. Yep. Yeah, some studies have shown that rent increases have slowed down in some areas.
Okay.
Especially in cities that didn't already have strong rent control. And we've heard from a lot of tenants who say they feel more secure because of the eviction protections.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's giving people some peace of mind.
So it sounds like for a lot of renters, AB 1482 has been a good thing.
I think so.
It's helped with affordability.
Yeah.
And it's made them feel more stable in their homes.
Right. Less worried about being kicked out for no reason.
But it's not perfect, right?
Our law is perfect.
There's still people who are struggling.
Definitely.
And those exemptions we talked about, they can make things really confusing.
They can.
But overall, it sounds like AB 1482 is a step in the right direction.
I think it is for a lot of people.
Okay, so it sounds like the debate over this law is going to keep going.
Oh, for sure.
Housing is such a big issue in California.
It's huge.
And there's no easy answer.
We need to keep looking for solutions.
Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive.
I'm glad you found it helpful.
I feel like I understand AB 1482 so much better now.
That's great to hear.
So for our listeners out there, what's the most important thing you want them to remember?
Be informed.
Okay.
Learn about the law, even if you think you're exempt.
Right.
Because things can change.
And if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Exactly. There are resources out there.
Tenant rights groups, legal aid.
Yep.
Even just searching online can be helpful.
It can.
Okay, great advice.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into AB 1482.
My pleasure.
We hope you found it helpful.
Me too.
And we'll see you next time for another fascinating topic.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.